Ladies and gentlemen, podcasting from Sydney, Australia. This is the Primodcast. Independent, unfiltered, and uncensored. Beginning in 3, 2, 1.
Senator Rennick, how are you?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Chris. How are you?
Good, mate. It's good to finally do this. We've been talking for a while now, probably to, I think, back end of last year, and finally got it done.
Yeah.
What's been happening?
Oh, mate, it's just, it's just all about the mandates, really, and the vaccines, unfortunately. It's that's what's happening, and unfortunately there's not a lot happening in the way of moving on and moving out of the so-called pandemic and the paranoia that's going on around it. I'd hope that once we hit the 80% vaccination targets, as the Premier said last year, everything was going to open up. Once we hit those targets, I'd hope that, we'd move on, but we haven't moved on at all. We've just rolled on to more booster shots, childhood vaccinations, and, paranoia around not having enough rapid antigen testing, which, I would have thought, at the end of the day, if you've got the flu, you're feeling pretty crook. So whether or not you need a test or not, I don't see what the point of that is. I mean, a lot of people get it. They have milder symptoms. Some people get sicker than others. But effectively, the issue needs to be is that we need to get, our civil liberties back and, just normalise the world we live in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's been, we all watched it. We've all heard it. 80% double dose and this will open up and this will happen and our lives will go back to normal, and we've all heard it, but it seems like a large portion of the population, at least significant enough to allow this to continue, have got extremely short-term memories where they don't recall what happened 6 months ago, what was said 6 months ago. They're still rolling on with the narrative, and it's almost a point where, like, you told us 6 months ago that if you get this vaccine, you can't catch COVID. They said that, right?
Yeah.
But now, no, we can, right?
Yeah.
So things have changed. And I think there's got to be a line drawn where, the Australian people have well and truly done their part.
Yeah.
If it wasn't, they've wasted, let's be honest, they've wasted the last 2.5 years of our life, or just over 2 years of our life with this. And lockdowns, I said from the beginning, lockdowns are going to do nothing but prolong the issue. Now, you did talking about an airborne virus that's extremely contagious. Lockdowns won't work. They'll be effective for a period of time, but all it takes is just one person to have it, just one, and it's going to spread again. So we've wasted a lot of our time over the past few years stuck in lockdown. Children have missed out on school. I've got a daughter who's starting year 2 this year. She's barely been at school since she started.
Yes.
So I understand it. I can see the difference in my daughter compared to my son, who sort of went through primary school. He's starting high school this year without too much of an issue. And the levels they were at the same age, there's a huge difference in terms of where they are. And that's a direct result of the government shutting down schools and parents not sending even when schools reopened, there were still parents that weren't sending their kids to school out of fear of them catching it. So, we've done our part. All of us have done our part, and myself included, when this thing first happened and we first heard about, the first exposure I had anyway to this thing was people dropping dead in Wuhan, right? That video that we all saw.
Yeah.
And I think at the time, everyone was thinking, well, how bad's this thing? I don't want to catch this, whatever it is, people are just dropping dead. And that was justified because we didn't know anything at that time.
Yeah.
But and you're happy to lock down, you're happy to keep your distance and do all these things. But as time's gone on, we've seen, okay, well, this is now, the data's come out. And it's nowhere near as bad. And even now, it's nowhere near as bad as they're making it out to be, yet QR codes remain.
Yeah.
These things are amazing. It's like, well, they've said that you have to be with a person or in the area, proximity of a positive case for, was it 4 hours?
Yeah. Contacts more than 4 hours. Or household contacts,
Now, I don't know about you, but I certainly don't go into Coles or Woolies for 4 hours. So what's the point of even scanning in? So
well, and so this comes back to the whole normalising this behaviour, which is what we don't want to happen. And, it's the issue, no one's denying that there's a virus out there that can't necessarily make people sick. That's not the issue. It's the reaction to the virus and the overreach around it that we'd never had to do before. So, for example, as I just mentioned with that rat testing, in the past, if you got sick, you got sick, you stayed at home, right? Why do we need rat testing? Likewise with the QR codes, why do we need it? Why do we still need it? And that's a good example, I think, of whereby a lot of these rules and regulations have been implemented for the sake of it rather than actually achieving anything. Because if they don't get rid of QR codes, isn't that effectively saying that, you're keeping the rules and regulations there because you want to maintain control of us rather than care about our health?
That's exactly what it is. And I think it's become more evident, early on, I was starting to get very suspicious. And I think it was more so when the lockdowns kept extending. I'm thinking, well, our lives are just the drastic change in how we were living up to that point. And I was thinking, well, this can't go on forever. I mean, it's a virus. Yes, it may be deadly to a certain, elderly and the vulnerable in particular.
Yeah.
But
as are all viruses, though. That's the important thing. It's not as though this virus is new in the sense that other viruses and respiratory diseases aren't a threat either.
Yeah, I mean, the flu is the same thing. In fact, I would argue that the flu is more dangerous in the sense where children die from the flu. A lot more children have died from the flu than they have from COVID.
Yeah.
But again, you don't see any of this. Not even social distancing. That's not even encouraged when there's a bad flu outbreak. There's nothing. It's, if you're sick, stay at home. Otherwise, live your life as normal. So that started raising some questions. And it's become now where it's blatantly obvious, well, to me anyway, that these measures that are in place at this point, it's about controlling the people, not about controlling a virus, because they've tried this for 2 years and it hasn't worked. So it's about controlling the people. And you know what? There's yourself. There's a few of you that are speaking up in Parliament. And mate, Liz, on behalf of all of us, thank you very much, because I think people need to understand that it doesn't matter whether you agree with the vaccines, whether you're supportive, whether you've had your 3 doses or you haven't. That's not the issue. The issue is our freedom and our liberties are gone. And historically, governments don't give those back.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And that's the thing now. We've set a precedent whereby every time, have we set the precedent? And I think the answer is looking like it's a yes, that every time there's a new virus or a new variant, we're going to have all this paranoia around the virus. And by all means, yes, protect the elderly and the sick, the vulnerable. But, for the majority of the working age population and the healthy population, they need to be able to get on with their lives, or otherwise, it's not good for the overall economy and society and health aspects, mental health aspects, our children, confidence, and they're, getting on with life.
Yeah, and the vaccinating, we'll speak about that for a moment. Not just the vaccine, but in general, the measures, like they want me to test my children twice a week on the return to school. Now, I can tell you now, there is absolutely no way in the world I'm testing my children twice a week. It's not going to happen. And there's many of these things that are in place. Like I've done my best as a parent to, I guess, reassure the children that, listen, it's not normal. Wearing a mask is not normal. Don't wear it. Don't have to anyway, but don't think you have to wear a mask because you don't. It's not normal. Testing yourself is not normal. I'm trying my best to make sure that they don't grow up thinking that this behavior and this thing is normal, because it's not normal. So we're going to have a generation of children essentially, which is, 10, 15 years from now, where they're immediately going to fall into line because in their minds, this is completely normal.
That's exactly right. Yep.
Yeah. So I do my part, I think, as a father, just to make sure they realize that it's not normal. You do not need to test yourself twice a week. And to think that they're forcing that on kindergarten, like we're forcing on 5-year-old children. Now, anyone that's had children knows that trying to get that thing in a child is not going to happen.
Yeah.
Let alone when they're starting school. That's enough for them. That's a lot of stress and they're nervous and anxious about it. And the last thing they need is to be subjected to that in their nose twice a week. But I mean, this is what's happening. And when you break it down and you say, well, listen, this virus really doesn't impact children, they'll say, yeah, well, they still get sick. Well, they get sick from many other things as well.
That's right.
Right. And that, it's just to protect the more vulnerable, to protect the adults. Well, when have we ever, as a species, relied on the children to protect the adults? Never.
Yeah, no, right. Yeah,
And the fact that people are so willing to do that is very concerning. I see arguments on Twitter. I'm sure you've seen the same people. There seems to be a very vocal minority that just are behind everything 110%. I'm like, you're ruining this country. You're part of the problem. I don't care whether, if you want to get vaccinated, fine. If you want to test yourself 3 times a day, like a hypochondriac, fine. That's your business. But don't force that on other people. Don't tell me what I should do for my children, right? And because
totally
that's right. You're creating a problem that doesn't need to exist. But because there's an extremely small minority of people that are extremely vocal, it fuels, especially people like Dan Andrews, who seems to these people just fuel his ego and fuel his response. And man, it's a shit fight. Let's be very honest. It's a shit fight at the moment.
Oh yeah. It's and unfortunately there's been an 18-month head start there by the premiers where they effectively have managed to get a lot of the population scared. I mean, I know people now who've had COVID who were very anxious before having COVID, and now they've just, their whole reaction attitude has changed after having COVID to going, and I know one person in particular is going, and these people, she's sort of now criticising other people being anxious. But, there's been a level of anxiety that's been fueled by these daily press conferences for the last 18 months by the premiers. They get up there, one at 9 o'clock, one at 10 o'clock, one at 11 o'clock, giving case numbers, etc., and just carrying on as though there's this, but basically everyone's at risk. And I mean, to an extent we are. No one's denying that there isn't a virus and that people can't get sick from it. But it's always been a virus. There's always been respiratory airborne diseases out there that you can get sick from. And, older people are more vulnerable. They always have been. But if we look at the figures and the average age of death, depending on what you read, it's somewhere between 80 and 84, which is pretty much around life expectancy. They've overplayed their hand on this. And I just, it's at the expense of, other health conditions and the general well-being of the population.
Yeah. And the economy. I mean, my grandchildren will be paying this back.
Yeah.
As an extraordinary amount of debt. And, back to that where you mentioned that the premiers get up and they do their press conferences that they do. Do you think they know what they're doing? Like, do you believe that there's more to it than just wanting to inform the public? Do you think they know what they're creating by doing that?
Oh, look, it's hard to impute their motive.
They'd have to be conscious of it at least. They'd have to be aware that's what's happening as a result of that.
Look, I mean, they should put it this way, that they should be aware of it, and they should be aware that it's not a healthy thing that they're doing, right? So if this mantra up here, Palaszczuk's always say we're keeping you safe, well, it's not just about COVID or all the other ailments that are going by, because, we've got record crime up here in Queensland, record crime, violence, and as in most other states, the hospital systems are struggling anyway. So if you're so worried about keeping us safe, why have you let, the hospitals fall into disrepair over the last 30 years anyway? So there's plenty of examples of where they're lying about that, but they should be aware of it. And it's hard to believe that they're not aware of it after 2 years of this psychosis.
Yeah, it's the messaging is so, I guess I'll look at it differently to an average person. For the average 60 or 70-year-old who, solely gets their information from the mainstream media, I understand why they're so anxious. I get it.
Yeah.
I 100% understand. Yeah. You can't blame those people for that because, that's all they're hearing. And, but, the words and the way they word things like the virus is hunting down the unvaccinated. Those sort of, it's not doing anyone a favor. Like, the people that are unvaccinated at this point in time, besides the very select few who couldn't have it due to medical reasons, don't want it. I'm an example. I don't want it. At this point, I don't care what you do or say. It's not going to change my mind. And in fact, it's the opposite, because as time gone on, I realized that I was justified in that there's really no need to worry about it. So you're not going to convince people at this point who have decided not to get this thing. You're not going to convince them now that to go and get it. But what's, I guess, confusing to a lot of people, and myself included, is how we have the Prime Minister stating that we do not have mandatory vaccination policies in Australia, saying the things that I'm sure we've all seen the United Australia Party's commercials, but he said that. That's fact. That's what he has said many times. How is it that the Prime Minister of the country, can make those claims, but yet know that the premiers are forcing it on people? Now, yes, they haven't got a gun to your head and saying, listen, you have to get this thing now, but they're saying you don't have to get it, but if you don't get it, you can't work, you can't put food on the table for your family, you can't go shopping, you can't go to the cinemas, you'll have no life whatsoever. So why hasn't he at some point stepped up and put an end to it?
Well, that's the question I've asked him, and that's why I withheld my vote from the government last year, and why I'm still withholding my vote, because I think that, you know, we do have the powers to stop these mandates. I don't want to go into too much law, but constitutionally, 1946, there was a referendum that gave the federal government responsibility under Section 51 that says, you know, this is the federal government has the powers to do such and such, and in respect to good governance, and that was in regards to pharmaceutical benefits, medical benefits, you know, sickness, and a few other things. That was actually voted up in a referendum in 1946. So the Australian people voted, you know, a long time ago that they actually wanted the federal government to be responsible for this, for some of these things, right? And that included vaccines. And we already buy the vaccines. We indemnify the vaccines via the TGA. We regulate the vaccines via the TGA. We indemnify the vaccines via this indemnity scheme. So how is it that we're responsible for all that, but now we're not responsible for the mandates? I mean, you know, it's the same thing, right? It's around the vaccine rollout. So why aren't we? I think we are, personally, my own number one. Number two, we've got the immunisation handbook that says you cannot be coerced into taking the vaccine, and you should know all the risks and, you know, the downsides of taking the vaccine. Well, the vaccine's provisionally approved only, so we don't know all the risks yet. And people are being coerced into taking it. So not only is there a constitutional issue here where I think we have the powers under the Constitution, there's a contractual basis as well where we have made it a oral or verbal contract via the immunisation handbook that says, you know, we can't force you into taking this. So then there's the third aspect that we regulate employment law in this country. It used to be done at state level, but that was consolidated up under the Corporations Act. And is now regulated through there's different laws, but, you know, the Corporations Act. So certainly in regards to corporations and Fair Work Australia, they're all federally run and regulated. We could easily, in terms of the private sector, put a thing out in the Fair Work Act that says no employer is responsible for the transmission of an airborne virus, because employers are now trying to say that, you know, it's not workplace health and safety issue. And look, sure, in hospitals and aged care centres that may be the case, but, you know, in the general day-to-day population, how is a small business going to know if a customer or, you know, if an employee got sick, where they got sick, or if a customer is you know, where they're going to get sick? I mean, they can't control the transmission of airborne virus. It is so silly to make them feel as though they're responsible for this. You know, it's not like, obviously, if you're in a mining company, you've got to make sure that people wear hard hats and, you know, high-vis shirts and know how to drive, you know, not drive their trucks or whatever, right? But, you know, I'm hearing now that even fruit pickers can't get a job unless they're vaccinated, and they're working outside. I mean, these laws are ridiculous. So I can't answer the question of why the PM won't step up and override the premiers. I wish he would. That is one of my sort of holdout points. And, you know, it comes back to where does all of this end? This is the scary bit, you know, like we've just rolled on from these so-called, we went past the exit the targets for the exit plan of getting out of this, and there's been no conversation about why aren't we out of it? It's just more boosters and boosters. I mean, come on. Yeah.
Well, you know what? It's what's I guess confusing, and which leads me to believe that there's definitely more to it, is the fact that Pfizer themselves are working on a new vaccine specifically for the new variant, right? We know that.
Yeah.
It's going through trials at the moment, and they said about March or April it should be ready. Now, that's them indirectly admitting or conceding that, listen, our vaccines aren't working. The current ones aren't working against this variant.
Yes.
So how can someone like Dan Andrews, because he's pushing for the booster shot to be recognized as just the third dose yeah, right. So not an additional, but just a part of the first two, right? How can they think that way when Pfizer themselves are saying, listen, it's not working. We're making a new one to solve that problem. But yet they're still insisting that people get booster shots. That defies logic.
Yeah, it does. I can't explain it. It's very frustrating. It's very frustrating. And it's like this vaccine at the moment was originally created for the Alpha variant. It was 2 years ago. And we've gone, a heap of others, but mainly Delta and now Omicron. And it comes back to, so this vaccine that's, being mandated is out of date for a variant that's already sort of come and gone, and has, very short-term lasting properties, if at all, didn't stop transmission. It just beggars belief that they're mandating that something that's practically redundant and, didn't really stop transmission in the first place.
Yeah, and especially the fact that Pfizer have conceded that listen, it's not working.
Yeah.
Immediately, as soon as in my opinion, as soon as they had maybe not just one, but considerable amount of transmissions from people that were vaccinated, once they realized that, hold on, this isn't stopping someone getting it or passing it on, the mandate should have been lifted immediately.
Yeah.
Immediately.
Right, well, yeah, I agree.
I don't agree with mandates, period.
I mean, if they didn't have a leg to stand on originally, they've got no leg to stand on now with the fact that transmission rates are so high amongst the vaccinated.
Yeah, I think actually you shared it.
Yeah, and especially when they said that it was going to stop transmission in the first place. If they came out and said we expect it to be 80% effective or something, they might have had a leg to stand on. But they went out and said, no, it's going to absolutely work. Well, it hasn't absolutely worked, and it would appear, judging by the rapid rate of transmission here, just in January across eastern states of Australia, that, it just doesn't work like they said it would. So why should we trust these people when they've got it wrong so many times?
Yeah, and I think there had to be a little bit of, I don't know. Obviously, they're aware. I said they're not stupid people. They're aware that it's not working. No matter how they try and justify it, it's not working. Now they're trying to use the fact that, because I shared a video yesterday, because on the 15th of January, Channel 7 had a segment on the news, Channel 7 News, Michael Usher, he was saying that, people are having to wait for elective surgeries because the beds are filled with mostly unvaccinated. He made that point, unvaccinated. Now, based on the New South Wales government, they've got a COVID intelligence unit, right, which breaks down a lot of the statistics within New South Wales hospitals. And it clearly shows over 70% of patients that are hospitalised are at least double vaccinated, and under 30% are unvaccinated. But at the exact same time, Channel 7 are saying, well, listen, no, it's filled with mostly the unvaccinated. Now, we all know why they're doing that. They're doing it to create division and to incite, hatred against people. And that's a problem in itself. But the media aren't calling out the government for their fuck-ups or their lies. Let's just say the lies, because they're blatantly lying at this point. So how do we hold the media accountable?
Turn it off. It's the only way to do it. And people are turning it off. I mean, and this is part of the reason why I think they're being, more and more alarmist, is to try and, because fear sells, right? So they're, trying to sell as much fear as possible so people watch as much TV. But they're losing market share in a big way, the mainstream media. I mean, I rarely watch TV. I just don't watch it at all. I mean, and I guess that's a combination of the job I'm in. Obviously, it's a 24-hour job, but it's I just don't trust them anyway. I mean, even if I wasn't in politics, I just wouldn't be able to believe what they're saying. And it's just so one-sided and alarmist. It's just
But it's always been that way, and that's what's amazing to me, is that we know, like, if you were to ask people 3 years ago before the pandemic, what's a few groups of people that you can't trust? The first thing I say will be the government, politicians. Yeah. No offense to yourself, but that's what people would say.
No,
right?
No, I'm the same.
Right? And then the second group would be the media.
Yeah.
But people know that these groups of people lie.
Yeah.
And the fact is that all of a sudden you've got people that were like, they know they lie. but yet they hold on to every word that they say and they treat it like it's gospel. And for me, I can't work that out. I think it's a combination of fear.
Look, I mean, I'm sure some people take it as gospel. I think a lot of people just do it because, they've got jobs. They can't be bothered. It's a lot of energy to go against the flow, push the counter narrative. I don't know that everyone who signed up necessarily believes it. They just, it would have been interesting to see if the mandates hadn't come in, what rates of vaccinations they would have got to. I always of the view that they might have got to 60 or 70%. 70% high, tops, and then maybe 60. But I'm not convinced that the majority of people actually believe the media black and white, but they just they've got their lives to lead and they can't. It's a lot of energy in pushing a counter narrative. It is hard work. I mean, I've been doing it for the last 4 months, and it's not fun. And I'm in the lucky position where I've got my job for another 3.5 years, regardless of what I say. I mean, I'll get a lot of abuse in the meantime, but for a lot of people, they need to be paid every day of the week, and they know that if they, get it wrong, they lose their job. So that's, and that's where it comes back to this coercion with the mandates. It's, they're lying. And this is where they really are lying. There's two angles to this. They're lying about how safe and effective the vaccines are. Number one, and we haven't even touched on vaccine injuries yet, which is a whole nother story. But they're also lying about, and I know Greg Hunt said this the other day, we've got to 95% vaccination rates. The arguments, there is no debate. Well, actually, there is a debate, because you're at 95% vaccination rates. Why isn't there herd immunity? So, but that goes to show their mindset is all about the target, the getting the jab into the arm, not actually stopping the transmission of COVID. Because if you want to have a debate about, did these vaccines stop the transmission of COVID? Well, the answer is clearly no, it hasn't.
Yeah, that's right. And as I've maintained from day one, and not based on my knowledge, because I'm not a doctor, but based on conversations I've had, and the biggest one was the one I did in August with Dr. McCullough. I think it was probably the first time that he'd spoken on anyone's podcast or any Australian media.
Right. Yeah.
When I spoke to him back in August, and that was really what he said on that episode. People hadn't heard that before. So when he was saying that, you can still get COVID and pass it on. This is back when we're talking about Delta. And he was right. For some reason, that people make out that you can only catch and pass on Omicron, and that's not true. We've seen that with Delta as well towards the end. So he was making these points back in August and saying all of these things about the children, the adverse reactions that children are going to be experiencing. And everything he said back in August has happened or is in the middle of happening. And, but he'll get slammed, as he does, get slammed for spreading misinformation. It's like, well, hold on a second. Listen. If these people are right about 9 out of 10 things, then you probably should listen to them to a certain extent, at least hear them out. But people are they've done a great job, not just the media, but also politicians have done a great job of painting these people with the same brush they'll paint, flat earthers with, and, all these other, conspiracy theorists, when in reality, these people just want to help and they're passing on information that's valuable. Like, we know how effective early treatment is. And the government was saying no. But now, if I'm sure you're aware of this, but do you know they've ordered in monoclonal antibodies back in, I think, mid last year?
Yeah.
No one speaks about it. You don't even hear about it.
Oh, yep. Been down the early treatment path. It's a no-brainer. And to me, it should be early treatment first, vaccine second, from the point of view that, given that it's an airborne disease, well, not a disease, virus. Sorry. Most healthy people who get it, their immunoglobulin A in the mucosal system will kill the virus, right? So wouldn't you be better off focusing on the 1 or 2% of people that get sick or sick from the virus, rather than try and vaccinate 100% of the population, lock them down, destroy their livelihoods? I mean, the impact on that is so much greater than if you actually dealt with people who whereby their immune system, their mucosal system didn't do the job that, most people can do, and then deal with it that way. instead they're trying to blanket, put a blanket set of rules across the entire population. And to the extent now where they're actually gagging doctors and nurses, which is another element of government overreach, which is just disgusting and intolerable, is where you've now got the bureaucracy, many of whom have never worked in a front-end setting in a hospital, dictating to doctors and nurses how they should be treating patients. I mean, that is just, and, there's a couple of, we're destroying livelihoods, right to work, we're overriding parental, rights in terms of, basically there's that much pressure on getting children vaccinated. That's being destroyed. The doctor-patient relationship, there's been no respect given to that. And government overreach in all of these areas is just going on too far and too long.
Yeah. And look, when you've got all of these things in combination, when you've got the gagging of doctors and nurses, when you've got doctors and nurses that have openly stated publicly that they're scared to speak out, when you've got police officers who are resigning and going on long service leave because they don't want to implement these mandates on the people. Like, can you imagine a police officer who's got a moral compass having to fine people for not wearing a mask or for, not having the mask pulled up correctly when drinking a coffee? I've seen police in videos check the contents of people's coffee cups, right?
Yeah.
Now, you have to make sure there's coffee in there and they're not just holding it for an example, as a reason to not have the mask on. Like, that's madness, right?
Yeah.
And when all of these things are happening, when there is clear and blatant censorship, I don't care whether you support, as I said, love the vaccine or you don't, but censorship is a serious problem to democracies, a huge problem.
Yeah.
And what you're seeing is anyone that dares to speak out against it, Dr. McCullough, Joe Rogan, Dr. Malone, mind you, experts, besides Joe Rogan, he's a host, but the doctors he's speaking to are experts, right?
Oh, yeah, that's right. And he does interview experts. He's not, that's what's annoying, is that they're upset because they're saying, he's spreading misinformation. Well, the guy's talking to some of the most, experienced, credentialed immunologists, heart specialists in the world.
Yeah, and I mean, I've spoken to a few people that Joe's spoken to, and you know what? There's people that I speak to that I don't agree with them, where I think that's a bit weird. I don't necessarily believe that. But instead of me saying, you know what, to everyone, I'm not going to, don't listen to this person because they're spreading lies. You know what I do? I open up my own mind and I think, okay, I'll try and look at it from their point of view. I'll do the research that they've asked me to do, and I'll see if I can find anything to back up what they're saying. But that's not happening. What's happening is he said that, this isn't effective and this is better. Censor him, cancel him, just deplatform him. They're not willing to debate. Like, when's the last time you've seen an expert, a health expert, come out and openly debate doctors like Malone and McCullough about it instead of just wanting them to be silenced?
No, you don't.
You don't see it.
That's the way, the left work and all this stuff is that, they want to cancel, discussion rather than have a genuine debate. And all you got to do, and it's not just in health, it's in other areas as well. You just got to ask them for the data. Not research papers full of alarmist terms, which is just basically doublespeak for propaganda. Show us the data. And a lot of the time, and even the science. I mean, I must admit, there was a great interview last week with John Campbell and Robert Clancy. I don't know if you watched that at all, but Robert Clancy is an immunologist who really knows his stuff, and just the amount of information I'll get out of that just hasn't gone mainstream in the last 2 years was just such an eye-opener. But you can't really have those debates where you get shut down. They're calling anyone that questions these COVID vaccines, which is new technology, right? And, it's arguably not even a vaccine, it's gene therapy. You just label an anti-vaxxer, which is very annoying. I mean, I've been vaccinated for everything other than the COVID vaccines. My children have. It's never been, my main speech never mentioned the word vaccine once. It's only in the last sort of 6 months since the mandates and the injuries, especially the injuries as well, which we haven't sort of touched on a lot. But, that in itself as well. I mean, we've been talking about how ineffective the vaccines have been, but we've also should note that they have, caused more injuries in Australia, 5 times more reported injuries in Australia than all other reported injuries from the other 128 vaccines since 1970. I mean, that in itself is a massive red flag that is not being touched on at all by the media.
Yeah. Now, you've been over that for months, so I often get a lot of very good information from your Telegram, so thank you for that. Because you know what, there's a lot of what you do, and there's a few others that do it. George Christensen does it very well, is produce data and statistics and science, not just your opinion. So you don't write on Telegram and say, listen, this vaccine is causing, reactions that we haven't seen for the last 40 years with all the other vaccines combined. You're not stating that. What you're doing is you're showing the data and then making that claim. So that's what people need to see. So I'll let you speak about that a little bit because you're all over it, much more than I would. So what are you seeing in terms of the TGA? So the TGA have a very similar system to the, was it VAERS system over in the US?
Yeah.
So how does that work? So it's obviously self-reported from the person. Now,
traditionally about 91%, this is prior to the COVID vaccines, about 91% of all adverse event reports were reported from medical professionals, including pharmacists, right? So, the bulk, and I suspect, I don't know what the numbers are going to be like with the COVID vaccines. You can self-report, but technically speaking, if you can get your doctor to report, that's better. Yeah. The TGA data is out there and everyone can see that. And I think most of your listeners would be well aware of, the issues around it, in particular, the number of reported deaths. And I think it's up to about 740 yet. The TGA are only saying 11 of those 740 are confirmed cases. Well, are you saying the other 98% of people who've reported are all wrong? And one question I've got to get out of the TGA is how many staff do they actually have looking at adverse events? Because I suspect they haven't even got enough staff to look at these adverse events. Given the sheer volume of adverse events, like over 100,000 now, in pretty much the last 8 months, I doubt that they've even had time to look at all of the details. But, there's heaps of information on that. What I'm around that I don't think a lot of other people would be is the personal experience of so many people who've been injured by the vaccine, which is one thing. But then on top of that, it's been the shunning by the medical community, which is the real and the loss of financial income. And to be injured by the vaccine is bad enough because, one day you're fit and healthy, you're told if you don't get this vaccine, you're going to get COVID, and possibly have a serious side effect, which for most people who have got strong immune systems and fit and healthy, the side effects will be very, that they may have a week in bed, don't get me wrong, don't want to downplay the flu. And, occasionally you'll have a fit and healthy person die from the flu. But that has happened prior to COVID. That's not unique to COVID, the COVID viruses. But it's the way they've been shunned. And I'm still, we're still working with people today who have been ill since the middle of last year who still can't get proper medical attention. And, doctors are turning around to them and saying, it's all in your head. They'll say to them, we think it's vaccine related, but we won't write it down. They can't get their discharge papers. They won't get sent off to do proper referrals, D-dimer tests, cardiograms and things like that, which, and I know, there's one particular case, where we've now seen that there were, we've got a report and the report said, blood test said there was clotting. And that particular person wasn't properly diagnosed. She was given a, breathing, it was an asthmatic thing when it actually turned out that she actually had a clotting issue that they knew about and didn't do anything about. And they're taking their toll, obviously, on the people. They're starting to take their toll on me. But how on earth the media and the government can walk past this and, they'll carry on about the COVID, side effects from COVID, but then completely ignore the side effects from the COVID vaccines is just a disgrace. And that's the thing, it's governments, there's a limit to what we can do in terms of controlling the transmission of an airborne virus. But, when someone is ill and we were the cause, we've coerced them, and I'll say we, governments, bureaucrats and media and corporations, employers have coerced people. We've got an obligation to help these people as much as possible. And now we'll never get their health back. Well, some people might get their health back, but, that's something we've got to do. And even today with over 100,000 adverse event reports out there, and it's important to add too that the TGA tries to downplay this by saying, most of them are just headaches or whatever. No, a lot of people might report headaches as a side effect, but that's not the reason why they lodged adverse event report. It'll be heart attack and headache, or stroke and headache, or neurological problems and headaches. So they may, because you put down a number of symptoms, right? So often headaches can mean anything and is a symptom of a lot of different adverse events. And they go, but the majority of these adverse events are headaches. Well, no, that's not the primary adverse injury, or that's not the primary injury. And they're getting away with that. Like the amount of misinformation coming out of the TGA is just shocking. Yeah,
it is. And I think we've got, how I first spoke to you, I think, was through the mother of a young woman, you know who I'm speaking about, who was, it took a toll on me, hearing the story and what happened, and a healthy young woman, really in the prime of her life, who looked after herself, now to be, plagued with these unnatural conditions that no one that age should have experienced. And again, it was an employment, right? An employment mandate. You have to have it for work.
Yeah.
And then not only that, because I still keep in touch with the family, and I heard only a few weeks ago that she ended up getting COVID.
Yeah. Yeah, I know quite a few got vaccinated, injured, and then still got COVID. Yeah.
That's the ultimate. That's a slap in the face, really, to go through that, and the lack of support available to those people.
Yeah.
Not only the lack of support, but the way it's handled, where it's, I've got this problem. Yeah, I don't think you do. I think you've got this. No, it can't be that. No, that's what it is. It's bullying to a certain extent, where they make it so uncomfortable for these people to report adverse reactions. And there's some serious ones like clotting, which is common. Myocarditis obviously is a very common one. But you're right in the fact that people won't just report a headache. Like, it's not worth the time, right, to report a headache.
Yeah.
But there's generally another condition that goes along with that headache. But to dismiss that, I'd love to know how the TGA do that, like in terms of what their process is for breaking them down and actually determining whether it's related or not. Because to me, if a 20-year-old gets the vaccine and then within 2 or 3 days has myocarditis, I'm sorry, but that's because of the vaccine.
Oh, absolutely. And these are the stories I'm hearing. Like, I knew one young man, 30-year-old, got vaccinated on the Friday, sick over the weekend, paralysed down his right-hand side by Tuesday.
Oh,
well, and I've had a conversation with Skerritt, the head of the TGA, about this, and he denies that it was a result of the vaccine. I said, how can you, he hasn't even diagnosed the guy. I said, how can you say for sure that it wasn't the vaccine? And whenever, you do these testing, these medical trials, you've always got to assume any adverse event when someone's been vaccinated is a result of the vaccine. You've got to prove that it wasn't the vaccine, not the other way around. But I'll give you another example. There was a lady that contacted me, was ill after the first shot, the Pfizer, and got the shakes and had troubles walking. Told the doctor said, oh, don't worry about it, it's not vaccine related. So, she trusted a doctor. She got the second shot, bang. She couldn't walk. Then the doctor at least sat down with her and they lodged an adverse event claim with the TGA. Just a report statement. And then she heard back from the TGA about 5 weeks later, and they rang up and said, oh, we don't think it's vaccine related. And she's a pro-vaxxer. This lady was pro-vaxxer. She even got a daughter, 16-year-old daughter, vaccinated. But that's when she said she got suspicious, because she said the TGA had never rung me once to talk through the diagnosis, my diagnosis with my doctor. They just looked at it and said, no, it's not TGA, not related to the vaccine. And the way they justify it is that when Pfizer did their initial trials, and they were too fast, not long enough, and many of your listeners would well know that there's been data from the post-marketing surveillance data that has shown a lot more adverse events and a much broader range of adverse events. Well, in the initial trial, they said, oh, it was only this side effect, and this side effect, right? And then, so basically, they're all saying, well, if it's not one of these side effects, because Pfizer said it, these are the only reported side effects, then it's not related to the vaccine. But of course, this is the stupidity of it, is that effectively the Pfizer trial only went for about 2 or 3 months. It had 22,000 in each group, so about 22,000 people. But clearly we know now that there are a lot more side effects than what was initially reported. And let's not forget, Pfizer's one of the biggest convicted corporate criminals in history. and yet somehow we're asked to believe these people. So a lot of people and that's the excuse the TGA use. Oh, well, it's not a recognised side effect. Who decided what was a recognised side effect? Pfizer, the manufacturer. Do you think they've got a vested interest in coming out and saying these are all potential side effects? Of course not. So, the whole point of the TGA and the FDA in the States and that is to actually, go through and test all this data with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that it all stacks up. And if you followed Senator Ron Johnson, initial Senate hearing last year with Maddie DeGarry and Brianne Drinnan, I think her name was,
yep.
They were examples of whereby, they weren't picked up in the trials. I think Maddie DeGarry was reported as stomach issues when she's actually in a wheelchair being fed through her mouth, and they just, downplayed the injury as a stomach issue. And then Brianne, I think her name is, she got seriously ill, and AstraZeneca just dropped her out of the trial, never followed up, and she was never reported. Her side effects were never even reported. So, and I mean, if I can, next time I've got a COVID committee hearing, that's the questions I'm going to be putting to the TGA, because they should be, with regards to the post-marketing surveillance data, that's a red flag. We've had these hearings whereby, we know people have had their adverse events downplayed. That's a red flag. So, yeah, and then the fact that, the head of the Pfizer, can't remember his name, he said last year, our vaccine's 100% effective in stopping transmission. Well, that's another red flag as well, because they've come out and made statements that just can't be backed up. Yeah.
It's bizarre to me that, I said, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a qualified, I'm not a scientist, but as you said, the red flags are so blatantly obvious. Now, if you have a product that requires, what are they saying, every 3 months, the intervals for the booster shots?
Oh, that's, yep, that's right. Yep.
Now, I'm sorry, if you need, that's 4 shots every 12 months.
Yeah.
If you need 4 shots of something every 12 months for the foreseeable future, I'm sorry, that's not effective. I don't care how you look at it. It's not effective.
Yeah. And let's not forget too, you need 3 weeks to start there before they even count you as vaccinated, because for the first 3 weeks, it takes 3 weeks to kick in.
That's right.
And let's not forget, in that 3 weeks, they're saying that they haven't got enough antibodies. So the vaccine hasn't produced enough antibody to be effective against the antigen, right? Or the toxic spike protein that they've put into you. So that means, so the question then goes back to, well, so you're saying that I've got to let this spike protein run around in my body for 3 weeks before the antibody that's supposed to come and save it's going to be effective? What's going to happen to my body in that time?
Yeah, and that's the real issue, is the spike protein. That's what causes the things like myocarditis, to my understanding from conversations I've had with the people who do know. You're essentially taking on one of the worst parts of the virus in the vaccine, and you're taking that on. Now, for a young person, they don't need to take on that risk. It's not necessary. Now we're seeing them vaccinate 5 to 11-year-olds. Why? And I've asked that question. And I try, and listen, I've tried my best to get doctors from the other side of the fence on this show to have a chat with them. I've tried. Dr. Sandro from Victoria Health, CEO of Vic Health, I've tried. He's very vocal on social media, but doesn't seem to want to speak. And I'm not going to look, I'm not a doctor. He's a doctor. I'm just going to speak to him and get his opinion on things, see how it differs from what we're being told. I want to get both sides of the story. But the problem is they don't want any part of that. Right.
No.
They don't. Yeah. I've tried facilitating a debate between Dr. McCullough and a few doctors, Australian and international. I'll simply just give them the platform to do that and they can chat, but they don't want to do that. McCullough's happy to, but the other doctors don't want to.
That's exactly right.
I was like, what are you scared of? Like, what are you worried about? And, the government would know at this point, and to assume they don't, look, you'd be a moron if you think that the government don't know something suspicious. But the effort they're putting in to cover up the vaccine adverse events, the fact that the vaccine is failing, make no mistake about it, it's failing. It's not working, it's failing. And the longer people go between shots, the worse it gets. So the effort they're going to cover this up is very suspicious. Because Pfizer itself is a private company. They're not a government-run organization. They're a private business. So why are the government so hell-bent on protecting them from, first of all, liability, and just making sure that people get this thing in their bodies, even though they know that Pfizer are creating a new one for this variant. They're still pushing the third shot. Like, what is it? What's going on? That's the question I think everyone has, but because it can't be, they're not naive to it. There's no way. They'd be well aware that something's not right. And there has to be a reason for them. Either they're gaining something, the government are gaining something from it, which could be control. I don't know. I can't work that out. That's the question.
Oh, look, I can't answer why, they're covering. I mean, there's a lot of, they might want to admit they're wrong. There's money. People, like the media make a lot of money out of advertising. The pharmaceutical companies are paying doctors to, and doctors do get paid for every, and pharmacists get paid for every injection they get, so they love it. So there's some doctors with a conscience who have stood down and done the right thing. Some doctors are gagged, but then there's other doctors fully on board. And a lot of these doctors aren't necessarily immunisation specialists or anything like that, or immunologists either, but, they still got. But the other thing too, and I've just picked this up in the last, I sort of knew about it, but I've never really, I never really thought about it. But with the protein-based vaccine, the amount of antigen that's in that vaccine is already quantified and specified. With the genetic vaccine, so Moderna, Pfizer, when they put that mRNA into your body, coming back to this 3-week period before, supposedly you get enough antibodies to kill the spike protein, you don't know. It's an unregulated amount of antigen because you don't know how many spike proteins are going to be produced by your body and for how long, and where all those spike proteins ends up going. So that is an experiment in itself, right? Forget the fact that the trial data from Pfizer was very flimsy to begin with, which is sort of statistical, sampling population thing. The actual science of you're taking, the other thing is, so this Pfizer one had to be stored at -70 degrees.
Yes.
You're putting a vaccine that had to be stored at -70 degrees into a body that's 37 degrees. There is a change in temperature of over 100 degrees.
Yeah. How
do you know? Now, the world gets upset about climate change when the atmosphere is going to potentially change by 1 degree and the world's going to come to an end. Well, and how do you know that this nanoparticle, very minute, mRNA molecules that are clearly highly vulnerable to temperature change and unstable if they've got to be stored at -70 degrees. How do you know they're not going to deform or become damaged when they're put into a much warmer body, number one? Or if they do manage to come in and get into the cell and then translate properly into a protein, that protein is going to be created exactly as the protein, as a spike protein that was intended, and not as some other malformed spike protein that is even more toxic. So there's all these variables that I'm not convinced has been researched enough. And certainly there is no way, given all of those, unquantifiable risks, that you should be rolling it out across 6 billion people, number one, at least once, let alone mandated for multiple boosters, and certainly not into our children. So, the other thing is, of course, this only ever goes into your blood immune system, not your mucosal immune system. So a lot of it produces immunoglobulin G, but your mucosal system uses immunoglobulin A. So a lot of it, doesn't even come across and act as a preventative, hence the transmission, which I did touch on before. But so there's all these risks. And the other thing is, I don't know if anyone understands biology, but, you're taught as a first-year science student, and I had a crack at science there for a while, the DNA stays in the cell nucleus and the mitochondria. The RNA stays in the cytoplasm of the cell. The RNA does not float around outside the cell, right? And that's what they're doing. They're putting this mRNA, albeit it's covered in a lipid coating, outside the cell in the hope that it's going to travel inside the cell. But what happens if not all of that mRNA actually goes into a cell and it's just floating around your bloodstream as a new toxic? And so all of that's unknown as well.
There's a lot of unknowns, and they're taking a risk. They're prepared, in their words, first of all, they deny there's that many risks involved with it. But when you do get the occasional honest politicians stand up and say, listen, we think it's worth it because it's for the better good. That's the problem, the better good. They keep saying that. That's how they justify mandates and all the rest of it. But It is very experimental, even in the sense where it's not like a traditional vaccine. It is a gene therapy, but that's exactly what it is. People say, "Oh, that's just no." That's exactly what it is. It's a gene therapy, right?
Yeah, and you can't. I mean, if it had worked, you might be able to argue, yeah, it's gene therapy, but it also has vaccine properties, like it's prophylaxis. Yeah. But given that we know that it doesn't actually stop the transmission, it's not really prophylaxis either. No. It's not a preventative. So at best, it's a treatment, and it's a treatment that you give to everyone who doesn't need it. Like, to me, you shouldn't be giving treatments to healthy people, especially, as we just said, an undefinable risk. A treatment with such an undefinable risk that could have, well, at best, we'll have short-term protection at best, 3 months, if you believe it works that long, for unknown long-term consequences. It's just the whole risk profile's upside down as well.
Yeah, well, the biggest thing for me is that it's provisionally approved. Now, it doesn't matter what side of the fence you sit on and how much you love it, how much you hate it. You can't deny that it's provisionally approved, as stated. We know that.
Yeah.
How can you mandate something that's provisionally approved? I liken it to P-platers on the roads, right? So when you go for your license, you just don't go for your L's and go straight to your open license, right? You go through stages because you're a risk. You're not experienced enough to be on the road. They limit how fast you can go and all the rest of it. Very different, but still carries the same sort of principles. That there's provisions are in place for a reason, and you can't mandate something, in my opinion, that is provisionally approved. It's insane that they're able to do that.
Yeah, I agree. There's no argument for me whatsoever, and I just don't know when all this is going to end. This is the scary bit.
Yeah, and I mean, there's many, I guess, safety issues with the vaccine. We could talk about them all day because there's a ton of them. But
yeah,
the thing at the moment that's concerning me and everyone, and obviously yourself, is that you don't know when it's going to end and what's it going to take. Because it seems like if they wanted the country to get back to normal, it would already have happened. Would have happened a while ago.
Yeah, and the perfect get out card out of jail, out of jail card, whatever, was the original exit plan that they agreed to last year. I must admit, I wanted an exit plan from the get-go. And when they initially announced the exit plan, I don't think the vaccines were mandated. Had I known the exit plan was going to lead to the next step of mandating the vaccines, I wouldn't have been keen for the exit plan. But they've used the exit plan to justify the mandates. They've got to their 80%, but now they haven't got rid of the exit. Effectively, honoured the exit plan, promised that they'd lift all this stuff, but they've kept the mandates, but they haven't kept their word on the exit plan. So, so this is where we're at now. Like, someone asked me where they saw things going, and I said, look, I've got no idea. I mean, I'm basically, just my whole, focus now is on getting out of this COVID crisis, because I don't think the country can move forward. I mean, I'd like to get out of the COVID crisis and deal with other things like monetary policy and taxation policy and the stuff I ran for, but I just can't see us ever getting onto that while we're hung up on COVID like we are. And
we're dealing. I mean, I started this show to talk to people about many different things, but it's unfortunate. But it needs to be discussed anyway. And these conversations that you and I are having are extremely important.
Yeah.
In the grand scheme of things, but. I'd love to be talking to you about, what are you doing on the weekend and all sorts of different things. We can't, because it's so, it dominates the headlines. It's dominating everyone's, school's gone back. That's the thing that parents talk about, instead of, being excited, your child's starting school, or, he's got up a year, or it's not
people
there.
Are anxious.
People are anxious.
I mean, I've got kids as well, and I'm anxious about the masks. I'm anxious about, are they going to sneak a jab into my eldest son who's, you know what I mean? Like, I shouldn't be thinking like that, and these are schools, they're not hospitals, and I mean, they'll be the first, the left will be the first to criticise us, saying, who are we to have a conversation? We're not doctors. But yet the teachers and all that are allowed to dictate medical, conditions to, nothing against the teachers themselves. I'm sure many of them have been sucked into this like the rest of us. But, it's, if you want your child vaccinated, you go to the hospital, you line up and you do that. I mean, I wouldn't recommend it, but that's what some people want to do that. But why is, and this is the other thing that annoys me about this whole lockdown and the whole COVID crisis, is that as you said before, if you're worried about COVID, by all means, you go and get vaccinated and you go and, you lock yourself down, you stay at home or whatever, but don't stop the rest of us from living our lives because, it's other people's fear as being used as a weapon against us to basically restrict our civil liberties. And that's just not right.
That's right. And I can't believe that we're at a point where people are, I'm very surprised this has happened, period, because what I noticed was leading up to this, there was like people are very progressive and we wanted, equal rights for pretty much everybody. And in fact, it was actually even brought into the education system to, to educate the kids and the fact that people are different, different gender preferences and all that shit. You know what I'm talking about. But yet when it comes to this, it's a complete opposite. It's like all of a sudden you have no right. If you want to be unvaccinated, then no, we're not accepting that. You should be, you should be staying at home. And
so this is another one of the weird things. Suddenly, discrimination is okay again for the vaccination, and just where did that come from? And the very people who have been so vocal about every other, equality and all that stuff have now suddenly go, no, there's no equality here.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Which is bizarre. So, which is very bizarre because it's, I thought up until this point that we're heading in a certain direction. And it just goes to show you that we weren't. We aren't more progressive as a nation, in my opinion, because if you were, it'd be consistent across the board. Yeah.
Oh, no, I think we've regressed. Definitely. A lot. 10 years. And I'll tell you what, I'll blame social media and the whole polarization of views and that on social media, especially on that Twitter side of things. I mean, it's just a cesspit in there.
Twitter?
Yeah.
Oh, Twitter's the worst for
it. Yeah. And that's the social media of choice for many in the left, but they're just feral. I rarely go on there because the amount of abuse you get is just staggering. From the so-called, people that, want equality and everything. And they only want equality if you agree with them. But, yeah.
That's right. You think Twitter's bad. You want to jump on TikTok. I put out, that's the worst. Believe me. It's
right.
10 times as bad as Twitter. So I put a video out on TikTok and it was me complaining that I went to the beach and I got sunburnt because other people weren't wearing their sunscreen, and I called them anti-slip-slop slappers. I was just taking the piss, having a bit of fun with it, right? And you get away with it because the algorithm can't detect whether you're being sarcastic or not. So it thinks that I'm being serious. So it's great trying to get my videos removed, right? But the comments, oh my God, you think Twitter's bad? And I'm telling you, TikTok is the worst for it. It's terrible. Right? But I
must,
Oh, it is, but it is. I get a stir out of it, and you know what? It's funny because I'm just carrying on the way they're carrying on. But when they have a go at me, I think, well, that's how it's ridiculous, isn't it? Well, that's what you're pretty much saying to me. That because I don't get vaccinated, your grandmother's at risk. What? Right? And it's social media has played a part, and I don't know if you've seen it. Have you seen that Youth Association or Council of Victoria, whatever they're called?
Oh, yeah.
With the two girls going to see Spider-Man?
Yeah.
That to me that's one of the more disturbing things that I've seen, knowing that they're funded by the Victorian government. Seeing that on there, that video, they're dead set grooming children.
What piqued me, and I'm not happy with this as, father of three, parental rights override government rights. We're not co-parenting with the government here. And when in that ad it said, oh, you're 14, you can choose whether or not you want the vaccine. No. 14-year-olds don't know enough about the vaccine and are easily peer pressured at that age. Even if they did have concerns, the bullying they can potentially get from, not choosing to follow the crowd is terrible, enormous. And yet the government's encouraging, and I just can't. I mean, that's not just in regards to vaccinations. That's happening a lot. How the government encouraging younger teenagers. Now at 16, you're getting closer. I'd still argue even 16 is too young. I'd say 18. I say 18, 16, 18, depending on circumstances. But, 14, no way.
No, absolutely not. And but that just goes to show you that that's where we're at. And that's very concerning because think about it. If you and I were to make a video on TikTok, me and you were going to the footy or whatever together, and we see a 14-year-old there and we're talking to them and, saying, listen, you don't need to get vaccinated. It's your right to say, no, you don't need the vaccine. Can you imagine what we would cop for that? Exactly the same thing, but just an opposite message. Instead of saying, you're old enough to make your own decision.
You saw what happened to George Christensen. He came out and said to parents, don't get your children vaccinated. And he copped it. Yet every other politician for the last 12 months has been saying, get vaccinated. And that's okay. So why is it when George had a different opinion than everyone else, he's not entitled to his opinion?
That's right.
And there's been other, he had colleagues that came out and criticised and called them conspiracy theorists and said they should listen to the experts. But which experts? Because as we know, there's other experts that don't think you should get the children vaccinated. I always don't like it when politicians say listen to the experts, because our job, certainly in the Senate, and I think it's even in the lower house, should be reviewing and critically analysing what the experts say, especially when those experts have been in the bureaucracy their whole life. Many of them have conflicts of interests that, would suggest that, it's in their interests to, sell as much, get the vaccine out because they make money from it, directly or indirectly. What you just said is exactly true. And we saw that happen just last week or the week before with George Christensen when he came out and said something that was along the lines of the narrative. He's now suddenly a conspiracy theorist. But the thing about that is, too, when he said that for children, ATAGI themselves said that the Pfizer trial was not powered to detect rare adverse events. That's a perfectly legitimate argument. The Doherty Institute last year came out and said it's not necessary to get 12 to 15-year-olds vaccinated because it's not going to make a big difference to transmission. That they've said that this ATAGI in the same, when they approved it, said we don't even know if it works for the Omicron variant. And they've added trimethamine to the formula since they did the tests. So you're now dealing again with, so how do we know that, this trimethamine combined with what the original vaccine was isn't going to be, cause allergic reactions to people in children?
Yeah.
So how is it when George comes out and lists these risks? That's conspiracy theory. What, isn't that his job to, point out some of the issues around this?
Yeah.
But what do the media and some of our own colleagues do? They just call him a conspiracy theory. And actually the Prime Minister did the same. It's just outrageous.
It is outrageous. And it's okay. Like that's the thing. If you want to speak out against the vaccine, like George did, you have to be a doctor. Otherwise, you're not worth listening to. But if you could be anyone else and say whatever you want, as long as it's positive.
If it's it's along the lines of the narrative, and you've got all these celebrities saying it as well.
Well, you've got celebrities that are paid. Like I know for a fact that celebrities, and not even celebrities, but even influencers on social media are getting paid to promote it. I know that for a fact.
Yeah.
And I've spoken to Andrew, Andrew Bogart. I'm sure you know Andrew Bogart.
Yeah.
Very good man. And we've had many conversations, and he's told me that, listen, these people are getting paid. Like I've been offered money to promote it. He's very, very open about that. And that just goes to show you, though, as to where they're at. Like when in human history have we had to have paid people who aren't doctors, mind you, paying them to pass on medical information?
Oh, that's because the market here is just so big. I mean, you've basically got the 6-7 billion people in the world. I know not all of them are, going to get the jab, but, you've got billions of people. I mean, this is just manna from heaven for these pharmaceutical companies. And they just can't believe how, and they're not just stopping at one. I mean, I was always a bit cynical at first that they needed a booster shot on top of it was a 2-shot jab, not, for it to work. Because in the past, the flu vaccine, even if, I had questions over whether that was effective, was only ever a 1-shot. Now this one's suddenly 2. It's sort of like, is that because you can double the profits? I mean, the cynic in me was thinking, well, is this just to double your profits because you need to? And now the boosters, I mean, it's just, I don't know, can't get a straight answer out of the health minister, Greg Hunt, why we've ordered 200 million of these shots. That in itself says to me, you don't even think it's going to work. The fact that, you order 25 million, maybe 26 million for a million doses to have as backup or something. But why would we order so many for a country population of 25 million people, of which 20 million people have taken it?
Yeah, and not only that, I don't know what's happened to AstraZeneca, but I was starting to see a change in that. So when people were getting AstraZeneca at first, I didn't even know. Can you still get AstraZeneca? I didn't even know.
It ceased production. I'll stand to be corrected on this, but yeah, no, we're not sort of rolling it out anymore in Australia. Whether or not there's still existing stocks left,
Why is that?
I don't know. I don't know what the go there was. That is a good question. I must actually ask the question why we stopped that, because as it turned out, they made a big hoo-ha about AZ being the more dangerous one and all these initially, but it looks to me like the Pfizer one actually had more side effects than the AZ one.
Oh, much. I'd say that based on what I know anyway, it seems to be much worse.
Yeah.
Than AstraZeneca. And
which seems odd that, because if that's the case, wouldn't you be sort of pulling Pfizer and, maybe using AZ if that's, you still wanted to push the agenda? Even though, yet again, if it's a good vaccine, you shouldn't need to be using it more than once or twice, maybe yearly at best. But even then, I sort of ask, that's even that, most, like all the vaccines you get when a kid, they generally last the best part of the lifetime or at least decades.
Yeah.
And suddenly now we need monthly booster shots. It's just a joke.
It is a joke. And you know what? I'd say that, look, this is my opinion from what I've read especially in the last few months, it seems to be getting more and more that mRNA, the technology in itself, seems. I just read an article the other day that said they're going to look at that potentially curing or at least treating different cancers and many different uses for this mRNA technology. And I don't know the production costs of it, but whether it's cheaper than it would be to make one like AstraZeneca, which carries a similar virus. I don't know, but it's very strange that. It was strange to begin with. You can. Cross, if you want to get a Pfizer, no worries. AstraZeneca, no worries. Moderna, no worries. Like, they don't care what you put in you, so long as you're putting something in you, which is odd in itself. Yeah. Very bizarre.
Yeah. It's interesting. Yeah. I actually had shares in an mRNA company. This is prior to getting into politics, called Viralytics, and it had a product called Cavac Tech or something. I forgot to get a name. And it got taken over by Roche or Merck or one of those guys. But it was for a cancer drug, right? Okay. And this is the thing too. When they did the trials for the Pfizer COVID vaccine, out of the 44,000 people, 160, there's 22,000 in each group, 160 unvaccinated got COVID, they all lived. 8 got COVID in the vaccinated group, they all lived, right? But the weird thing is the 99% of the people didn't even have COVID. So how can you test it on people that don't even have COVID? At least with the cancer trial, if you're doing it for a cancer drug, the person's got cancer. That's the weird thing about these trials. You're trialing it on healthy people who you can't even see if it's been, effective, right? At least with the cancer trial, and I know this because I had biotech shares and other things as well over the years. Like, it's so hard to find good candidates for these things because you've got to find people with cancer. They've got to be willing to go for the trial, take the drug. And then it takes years, right? And this is the thing. And the thing about cancer, if you've got cancer, you know that in most cases it's probably terminal unless something happens, right? Whereas with COVID, 99% of people, pick your decimal point, survive it. Yeah. So, this was the weird thing as well. Like, we're talking about whether